What's up, guys? How's it going, man? We are here on Daniel chapter 2. I believe this is lesson 3. We are here back at the Pentecostals of Sparta. We got DJ Michael Weedman back here doing his thing, and of course, you guys get to see me again. So here we are. This is Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel chapter 2. And this is what I like to call the foundation of prophecy, okay? We really start to get into some inner working things, very prophetic vision that Nebuchadnezzar has and Daniel has. And it not only leads from the empire of the present day, which is Babylon, and then on to Persia and stuff, and we'll talk about that later, but it goes all the way to the very end of days and the last days, when it talks about the rock and the mountain. Okay, this is talking about Jesus Christ's kingdom when he returns. Okay, so this is an incredible prophecy and dream that these guys have. And so, hey, we're going to get right into this. We got a lot to go over. And so I'm going to kind of break this up into 3 sections in Daniel. And we're just going to take it verse by verse. And we're going to let the Lord do this, all right? Let's do this, guys. Come on. All right, verse 1. Let me get my phone. I got my phone today. I'm going to use my phone. A little bit more clear. All right. One night during the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such disturbing dreams that he couldn't sleep. All right, we'll stop right there for a second. Have you guys ever had a dream like this? A dream that just struck you so deep and moved you so much that you've just never forgotten it. Okay, maybe it was a terrifying dream. Maybe it was an amazingly awesome dream. Or maybe it was some kind of crazy dream that you knew deep inside in your heart that it meant something, okay? You couldn't understand it. You didn't know exactly what was going on, but you knew it meant something. I don't know about you, but I've had those dreams before, and I think a lot of you guys have out there too. And it could have been 10, 15, 20 years ago, but you still remembered that dream like it was yesterday. And you just knew that you knew that you knew that it meant something. And so, guys, dreams mean something, okay? And I'm not saying all dreams. You know, we do have demonic dreams sometimes. We have nightmares, night terrors. Sometimes we have dreams that just suck the life out of us, make us feel depressed, or just, it seems like the enemies condemn you, or you're reliving some mistake that you made way back when, right? You have a dream, something like that. You know, and these dreams are from the enemy. And we know that. That can happen sometimes. But the Lord still speaks to us through dreams and visions, okay? And we hear a lot of people talking about how, well, that was just for the early church. And Jesus Christ taught, that was just for Jesus Christ and the 12 disciples. And that doesn't happen no more. And that only happened in the Old Testament. And after the 12 disciples, you know, did their thing, that died down. He no longer did miracles. You no longer cast out demons. And he doesn't talk to people through visions. Guys, that is a lie from Satan himself. Do not believe that. Do not believe that for a second. That is a lie from Satan. The Lord has done these things since the beginning of time. Okay, he has done this in the Old Testament. Peter and Paul was having visions, dreams, and he still uses those same things that he used to back then, now in today's age. Guys, we are in the church age. If he's given these people to the early church, we're talking about the church for now. We're still in there. We got 2,000 years of the church age, guys. These things are still happening right now. So let's look at a quick scripture. It's Job chapter 33. It says, "For God speaks again and again, though people do not recognize it. He speaks in dreams and visions of the night, when deep sleep falls upon people as they lie in their beds. He whispers in their ears and terrifies them with warnings. He makes them turn from doing wrong. He keeps them from pride, and he protects them from the grave and from crossing over the river of death." So that's Job, guys. Guys, Job is one of the oldest books in the Bible. Okay, this is during the age of the patriarchs. We're talking around Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob time. That's when this is written. And he's telling you about that way back then. And of course, we have the Old Testament prophets, and they're always recording their dreams and visions and writing down prophecies. And like I said earlier, you have Peter and Paul. and some of the disciples that are having these visions and dreams. And guys, he's not going to stop now, okay? So I wanted to kind of touch base on that. There is still the fivefold ministry. There is still the gifts of the Holy Spirit being used today. Okay, fivefold ministry, we're talking about prophets, disciples, pastors, preachers, and the gifts of the Spirit, prophesying, discernment of spirits, all that kind of stuff. Guys, those are still being used today. Okay, so don't believe that is just gone and that was history and we no longer do that, because I'm telling you what, you're believing a lie. And we are in the last days, and I can guarantee you that stuff's happening right now. So let's go on. We're going on to verse 2, okay? Verse 2 says, he called in his magicians, his enchanters, his sorcerers, and astrologers, Satan's prophets. And he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed as they stood before the king. Okay, so here we go. Like I said, I like to call these guys Satan's prophets. He brings in all these guys, and we know that psychics, mediums, and sorcerers and all that's not going to be able to give him a correct interpretation, because it ain't going to be from the Lord, right? All right, verse 3. He said, I have had a dream that deeply troubles me, and I must know what it means. So here we go. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he knows it's something important. And he knows that it means something. And he's restless and he can't sleep, and he's got to figure this out. Verse 4 through 6. And guys, we're going to go through some of this stuff quick. We're going to go through most of these scriptures, 20, 25 minutes, but we're going to get to about 3 or 4 scriptures, and we're going to spend about a half hour just on those 3 or 4 scriptures. So just hang in there with me, and let's go. Verse 4 through 6 here. Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, Long live the king. Tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means. But the king said to the astrologers, I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. But if you tell me what I dreamed, and what the dream means, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means. So here we go. Nebuchadnezzar's making this super difficult. He's pretty much asked the impossible task here. It's one thing to say, hey, tell me what my dream meant. But it's another thing to say, not only do I want you to interpret my dream, I want you to tell me the dream that I had. Okay, there's nobody that can do that except for the Lord God Almighty is going to be able to reveal that. Okay, so verses 7 through 11. They said again, Please, your majesty, tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means. And the king replied, I know what you're trying to do. You're stalling for time, because you know I am serious when I say, if you don't tell me the dream, you are doomed. So you have conspired to tell me lies, hoping I will change my mind. But tell me the dream, and then I'll know that you can tell me what it means. The astrologers replied to the king, No one on earth can tell the king his dream. And no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people. So these guys, they're starting to trip out, right? I mean, they're freaking out. They know he means business, and they're like, dude, we cannot do this. I don't know what you want us to do, but we ain't going to be able to do it, all right? Verses 12 through 13. The king was furious when he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. And because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. Verse 13 there. So the king demands that all the wise men and all the prophets be killed in the land. And this means that Daniel and his 3 friends are about to get axed too. It didn't matter to Nebuchadnezzar if you were a wise man, or like Daniel and his 3 friends were still in training. They were only in training. This is their first year, and they're about to die, right? So Nebuchadnezzar didn't care about that. He didn't care if you're in training. He didn't care if you're a wise man now. If you've been a wise man for 30 years, you are about to die. He's about to kill everybody because, Nebuchadnezzar's a little bit crazy. All right, so we got verses 14 through 16. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. He asked Arioch, Why has the king issued such a harsh decree? So Arioch told him all that had happened. Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. So here we go. Daniel's being an awesome guy. He's trying to save everybody's life, right? And so he asked the king for more time. But I want you to notice something that Daniel said. Not once did he ever say that this was impossible, okay? He never said, I can't do this, okay? He went up to Nebuchadnezzar and said, give me more time and I will tell you the dream, okay? He was very confident. He knew he had a gift, and he knew the Lord God Almighty was going to give him this dream if it was the Lord's will. So he's very confident in this. Okay, verses 17 through 23. We'll go ahead and read the rest of this section here. Then Daniel went home and told his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret, so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. So these guys are in all-out prayer and fasting mode. I mean, they're like, please, 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 Lord, please give us this dream so we ain't got to die tomorrow morning. Okay? Verse 19. That night the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. He said, praise the name of God forever and ever. For he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of the world events. He removes kings and sets others up. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in darkness. Though he is surrounded by light, I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. For you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we have asked of you and revealed to us what the king has demanded. So here we go. He's jumping for Jubilee. He's excited, and he's got a message to give to the king. And he knows now, he's like, all right, finally I can breathe a sigh of relief here, and I'm not going to get it tomorrow morning. Okay, so here we go, the next section. That was Nebuchadnezzar's dream, that first section, those first 23 verses we read. And so the next section is what we call, or what it says, Daniel interprets the dream, which is verses 24 through, I think, 44, 45, something like that. And so we're going to get into that. And like I said, we're going to get to about verse 39, 40, 41, when we really start getting into the inner workings of this statue. And we're going to kind of take it slow. We're going to have a little bit of a history lesson. But guys, we're also going to have some prophetic things. We're going to talk about end days, last day stuff, so stick with me. I know some history and some maps. Some people are like, but trust me, you want to listen to some stuff because we got to tie some things in together. And we're going to get into a lot more stuff later down in Daniel and, of course, in Revelations. And this thing is going to kind of tie this up. And we're kind of going to give you a little prequel, a little insight into some of the things that we're going to talk about later down the road. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. Daniel interprets the dream, verse 24. Okay, says, Then Daniel went to see Arioch, whom the king had ordered to execute the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel said to him, Don't kill the wise men. Take me to the king, and I will tell him the meaning of this dream. So here we go. Daniel's being compassionate to the wise men. He's actually being super cool about this. He knows that, hey, I could actually turn some of these guys on to the God of Israel by what's about to happen. So he's like, don't kill anybody yet. I have the message. I have the meaning of the dream. Okay, verses 25 and 26. Arioch quickly took Daniel to the king and said, I have found one of the captives from Judah who will tell the king the meaning of his dream. The king said to Daniel, also known as Belshazzar, is this true? Can you tell me what my dream was and what it means? And we'll just continue on to 27 and 28. Daniel replied, There are no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or fortune tellers who can reveal the king's secret. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has shown the king what will happen in the future. Now I will tell you your dream and the visions you saw as you lay on your bed. Okay, so here we go. Daniel instantly separates all the false prophets, all the mediums and fortune tellers and all these guys right off the bat. And he pretty much denounces them, and he directs all his attention to glorify God. That's an amazing prophet, and that's exactly what they need to do. Okay, verses 29 and 30. While your majesty was sleeping, you dreamed about coming events. He who reveals secrets has shown you what is going to happen. And it is not because I am wiser than anyone else that I know the secret of your dream, but because God wants you to understand what is in your heart. So once again, Daniel is humble, and he redirects his gifts and his wisdom to the one who gave him these gifts. Okay, we talked about this last week. Daniel, he was probably the best, along with Joseph, at interpreting dreams and visions. Okay, so now he is being able to use this gift. And so he is telling Nebuchadnezzar about events that are going to take place in the future. Okay? Verses 31 through 35. In your vision, your majesty, you saw standing before you a huge, shining statue of a man. It was a frightening sight. The head of the statue was made of fine gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its belly and thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron, and its feet were a combination of iron and baked clay. As you watched, a rock was cut from a mountain, but not by human hands. It struck the feet of the iron and clay, smashing them to bits. The whole statue was crushed into small pieces of iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold, and the wind blew them away without a trace, like chaff on a threshing floor. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain and covered the whole earth. Okay, so Daniel explains Nebuchadnezzar the dream in perfect detail of exactly what the both of them have saw. Because now we have Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, and now we see the night before this, Daniel also has this dream too. Okay, so now he is trying to tell them, and he's talking about he speaks about the dream and gives them a detailed part of the 5 parts of the statue. Okay, and we're going to show you something here in a second. I actually have a slide here of the statue of what both these guys dreamed. And so we're going to get into this here in a second. And I usually do this to the class, and I actually give them a little pamphlet, and they try to guess what they are, see if they get it right. But obviously we're not going to do that now. We're just going to give you the answers right now. But we see that the head of gold is Babylon. The chest and arms there are Persia. The thighs of brass is Greece. The legs of iron is Rome. And finally we have the iron and clay mixture is the Western Europe. This is a conglomerate of nations in the Western Roman Empire. Okay, and we're going to talk about that later. And the rock is Jesus Christ coming down, and what happens is he sets up his kingdom. That's what the mountain represents. A kingdom that is never to be taken down, never to be destroyed, and that's what destroys this statue or all these kingdoms. And then it is Jesus Christ, the Lord God of heavens. His kingdom comes down from heaven, and it's never to be destroyed. We're talking about the 1,000-year reign of Christ here, okay? And the millennial kingdom, this is when he sets up his kingdom, okay? So, that being said, we're going to get on to verse 36. 36. This is Daniel talking, that was the dream. Now we will tell the king what it means. Okay, so Daniel, notice Daniel when he says this, after he explains what happened, he tells him the dream. Notice Daniel doesn't say, well, Nebuchadnezzar, was that the dream you had? No, he wasn't like that. He was confident. He's like, that was the dream, and now I'm going to tell you what it means. Daniel's awesome. All right, so here we go. Verse 37 and 38. Your Majesty, you are the greatest of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and honor. He has made you the ruler over all the inhabited world and has put even the wild animals and birds under your control. You are the head of gold. So here we go. Daniel encourages Nebuchadnezzar, first by explaining to him how powerful and great his kingdom is, and then he tells him that he represents the head of gold, and more importantly, Babylon. The kingdom of Babylon represents the head of gold. Okay, the Babylonian Empire is the head of gold, is what Daniel says. Okay, and we kind of did a little background of the rise of Babylon last week, if you were talking, or if you listened to lesson 2. And so I'm not going to get too crazy into the rise of Babylon because we did that last week, but we are going to get deep into the rise of these other empires like Persia and Greece and Rome. Okay, and we're going to sprinkle in some other prophetic stuff later down the road and like Daniel 11, okay? So, hey, let's go ahead and read 39 and we'll get into it. And we're going to break this up into two parts in verse 39. So it says, "But after your kingdom comes to an end, another kingdom inferior to yours will rise to take your place." Okay, so here we go. He's prophesying now that his kingdom is eventually going to fall. And then we get into the part of the statue that represents the chest and the arms. And that is none other than the Persian Empire. Or what I like to call, and what a lot of historians like to say, the Medo-Persian Empire. So if we look at the chest and arms, and we see one arm here, one represents the Persians, and the other represents the Median Empire. And together, they end up joining forces to become the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay? And that's what the chest and arms of silver represent. So, we're going to do a little bit of a history lesson on the Persian Empire and how it rose and how the Persians and the Medes decided to unite. Okay? So, in the beginning here, and we're going to go to this map here for a second. And I'm going to kind of teach from this Babylonian Empire at a tight map because it's a good map that you guys can look at and see where I'm talking about. I can't pinpoint it like I can in class, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about. I'll kind of direct you as I go. But Cyrus the Great, and we can look at it in a second, but Cyrus the Great was the king of the Persian Empire at this time. Okay? And so what takes place before he decides, well, I'm going to take over the Median Empire, he unites with somebody called Darius the Great, or Darius the Mede. And so these guys decide, we're going to join forces. So if we look at our map here, if you see, it says the Median Empire. If you kind of split that in half, the Persian Empire was kind of like the southern part, and the Median Empire was the northern part. At this time, I'm talking about right before, before Cyrus the Great decides to take over Babylon and decides to take over the Median Empire. Okay, so Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire, their capital is in, if you look down below, it says Persis. That was a city called Persepolis. That was the capital of the Persian Empire. Okay, and that is where Cyrus ruled from. And so, and like I said before, he decides, you know what, I'm done with the Median Empire. I'm having a bunch of trouble with them, and I need to take them over, and I want to be the new big kid on the block. So he talks to a good friend of his named Darius the Mede. And Darius the Mede was a general in the Median Empire. He was a commander in the Median Empire. And these guys knew each other very well. Cyrus the Great had a lot of respect for Darius. Okay, and you are not going to find a lot of historical content on Darius the Mede. You can search him, you can Google him, and it's really going to be hard to find stuff because that was not his name. His actual name was Gubaro. Okay, he was a general in the Median Empire, Gubaro. And sometime along the way, he must have changed his name to Darius the Mede before he becomes king of Babylon. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But so Cyrus the Great and Darius the Mede decide, okay, I got your back. Let's do this. We can do this. I got tons of soldiers underneath my wing. I've been doing this a long time, Cyrus, and I will help you defeat the Median Empire. So these guys go at it, okay? And they take down Ecbatana, which is the capital of the Median Empire. And we talked about that last week. Ecbatana is right there in the middle of the Median Empire there. And they take the capital down. And after this, Cyrus the Great becomes king of all the Medo-Persia. Okay, and so Cyrus the Great and Darius the Mede kind of make an agreement before they decide to take down the Medo Empire here, and they decide, hey, we're going to take over some other kingdoms too. But Darius the Mede says to Cyrus the Great, listen, I'm going to help you do all this stuff. I just want one thing from you. When we get done, I want to be the king of Babylon, or I want to be the satrap or governor of Babylon. That's all I want. I love Babylon. It's a beautiful city, and I just kind of want to hang out and retire there. Okay, so Darius the Mede is probably in his upper 50s at this point, and while Cyrus the Great is still in his 30s. So like I said, Darius is kind of like a fatherly figure to Cyrus, and they known each other for a while. And so he had a lot of respect for Darius, and he kind of says, yeah, no problem, man. Do your thing. Okay, so now them two are together. The Medo-Persian Empire has assembled, and so they say, okay, next thing's up. I'm going to go take out the Lydian Empire. And if we look back at our map, I don't know if it's still up, guys, but you see the kingdom of Lydia, okay, right? That is Western Turkey. They decide that they're going to go over there for the next 4 to 5 years. And real quick before I get too far, in 550 BC, that was when Cyrus the Great and Darius the Mede take out Ecbatana, and that is when the Persian Empire is formed to what we see it here today, Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, but anyways, they decide, hey, we want to go take out the Lydian Empire, and so for the next 4 or 5 years, they go up to Western Turkey there, and they're having some battles, and then all of a sudden, the capital of Sardis falls to the Medo-Persians in 546 BC. Okay, and you may recognize the capital of Sardis. We know in Revelations that Sardis is one of the 7 churches in Revelation. Okay, but at this time, Sardis was the capital. So they take out the kingdom of Lydia, and so they encompass all that land. So what do they do next? They're having some problems with Babylon. You know, they're trying to extract money from them. They're having some little battles all along their borders and stuff. So they decide, you know what? This is it. We're going for it. We're going to take out Babylon. Okay, so they march south and slowly take over parts of the Babylonian Empire. And all of a sudden, in 539 BC, King Cyrus and Darius the Mede capture Babylon overnight. It happens in a single night. And if you guys kind of remember, maybe you've read Daniel chapter 6, the writing on the wall. I think as Belshazzar was the king at that time, he's drinking cups and blaspheming the Lord and all this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden the hand writes on the wall, and then he brings Daniel in there, and Daniel interprets what was being said and basically says, your kingdom's about to fall. And then basically the very next morning his kingdom fell. Okay, it literally happened overnight. Darius and Cyrus the Great take over this kingdom overnight. Okay, and like I said, they had an agreement together, and at that point, they keep Darius the Mede, becomes kind of like the king or the satrap or the governor of Babylon. And Cyrus the Great kind of goes back to Persepolis and runs the Medo-Persian Empire from his hometown down there in South Iran. Okay, so kind of going over some stuff here. I know I'm kind of talking quick. Hope I'm not throwing you guys off here. But there are some key points, key years that we need to remember, okay, that are kind of like our building blocks or our starting points from things that happened. And so we talked about a couple of them, and I just want to briefly go over them. That is 539 BC. We talked about that last week. We just talked about it now. 539 BC is the year that Babylon falls to the Medo-Persian Empire. It's also the same year of the Cyrus decree, which we talked about last week, which is when he allowed the Jews and the Israelites to return back home from Babylon to Judah to start building the temple and stuff like that. They were able to return from captivity. Okay, so that is a monument year. Like I said before, we have 550 BC is when the Persian Empire became formed, and we also have in 546 BC when the capital of Sardis, Lydian Empire falls. So, and later we're going to talk about 330 BC is when the Persian Empire falls to Greece. Okay, so we'll go on here. It says later, verse 39 we're still on. Okay, it says, after that kingdom has fallen, yet a third kingdom represented by bronze will rise and rule the world. Okay, so what kingdom arises after the Persian Empire? It is the Greek Empire. Okay, the belly and bronze and the thighs of bronze represents the Greek Empire. Okay, we know through history that the Greek Empire is created by King Philip of Macedon and his well-known son Alexander the Great. Okay? Approximately, and we're going to get a little background here, so stay with me. Approximately 80 to 100 years after the fall of Babylon, the Persian Empire ended up taking out Egypt, okay? They take out Egypt, and they amass all that land, and we can kind of go over to this next map of the Medo-Persian Empire at its height in 490 BC, and we can kind of see the amount of territory they were able to amass, okay? At this point in time, this is the world's largest, greatest empire up to this point, okay? They took over a big swath of land here. So, like I said, they take over Egypt, and about 80 to 100 years after the fall of Babylon, they decide, hey, you know what? Let's go back north, and let's start crossing over the Aegean Sea. Okay, and if you don't know the Aegean Sea, that's the sea in between Greece and Turkey, that little area where the Greek Isles are at. And so they start going over there, and they decide, hey, we're going to start taking apart stuff. We want some more land. And so they go up through Macedonia and into Greece. And, at first, they're successful, okay? But have you guys ever seen the movie 300? I know a lot of you guys may have seen, I think Gerard Butler's the star, 300. It's kind of barbaric, but it's a really cool movie. It's very interesting, but it has a lot of historical value to it. And that kind of shows you the beginning stages of when the Persian Empire with Xerxes decides to start taking over parts of Macedonia and Greece and stuff like that, and the Spartans, right? And so if you know the movie 300, these 300 Spartans hold the Persian Empire up for I think it's like a week or something like that. And at this crossing gate, it was a very tough area for the Persians to get through into the land of Greece. And so these 300 soldiers hold up this massive army for a week, and they slaughter a lot of Persians. And it was kind of an eye-opener to Xerxes and the Persian Empire, because they weren't expecting the Greeks and all them to be such a formidable foe. Okay? But anyways, so like I said, this starts happening, and they start taking over parts of the Greek Empire. And at first, they are successful. They end up taking the capital, or I should say, Athens. They end up taking Athens, Greece, and win a couple other key battles. But then they start to be able to push them back. The Greeks kind of form together, and along with the Italians, and up there in Macedonia, they decide to start fighting back. Okay, and they eventually end up pushing them out of Athens. They retake that land, and they begin to take back all the land of Greece and Macedonia that the Persians originally got at the onslaught. And they actually end up pushing them all the way back to Turkey. Okay, they're on the west coast of Turkey. And so they're doing really good. Like I said, the Persians were not expecting them to be this formidable foe. And quite honestly, they had so much land to try to protect and to govern that it was probably too hard for them to even try to do that. But anyways, they push them back. And so we're going to fast forward about 100 years later to about the year 342 BC. Okay? And this is the time of King Philip of Macedon. And so King Philip says, and this is one of the Greek kings, okay? And he says, you know what? I am sick and tired of the Persian Empire. I'm sick and tired of them coming into our land, pushing us around, demanding that we pay taxes, and we've pushed them all the way back to Turkey. Why don't we just go ahead and start taking it to them? Let's start taking some of their land from them. Let's start teaching them a lesson, see something what they're trying to do to us, let's do to them. So this is what his plan is, and it's a great plan, but unfortunately, Greece would not unite under King Philip. Okay, at that time you had a lot of different kings. You had the Thessalonians, you had the Spartans, you had the Athenians, you had the Macedonians. You also had over there in Rome and in Italy and Sicily, they had their own king, and they weren't ready to unite under King Philip. However, they would, unite under King Philip's son, Alexander the Great. And I know a lot of you have heard about him over and over and over. So, Alexander the Great comes on the scene, and he starts going at it. And he starts taking multiple cities down, multiple territories down, and he ends up pushing back the Persian Empire all the way back to Nineveh, or Mosul, over in Iraq and Iran. Okay, he's pushing them back, and he's taking all their land. And so he eventually wins a huge battle and a huge victory in a city called Gaugamela. Okay, and once he does that, and that's in Kurdistan, Iran, but he wins this battle, and the Persian Empire retreat all the way down to Susa, and we can almost go back to this other map, Babylonian Empire at its height, because it seems to be the best map we can look at. But Alexander the Great pushes the Persian Empire all the way down to the city of Susa, and down to Persis, if you're looking at the Median Empire there. And so he pushes them all the way back to there, and he amasses all this land, and then in 330 BC, like we were talking about earlier, 330 BC, the cities of Susa and the capital of Persian Empire, Persepolis, fall to Alexander, and this marks the end of the Persian Empire. The next empire, the next rise to world power is the Greek Empire. And so we have a new one on the scene. And we can go over to the Greek Empire. There's a slide there I'd like to show you, just the amount of land that they acquired, It's just amazing. And we're going to talk about that in a second. It's just absolutely crazy. But it says in verse 40, we'll go ahead and read that real quick. It says in verse 40, following that kingdom, the Greek Empire, there will be a fourth one, as strong as iron. That king will smash and crush all previous empires, just as iron smashes and crushes everything it strikes. So yet another empire rises after the Greek Empire, which is represented by the iron legs of the statue, and this is the great Roman Empire. And we know from history that no other empire in history was ever as great as the Roman Empire. Was never as powerful and never as large as the Roman Empire. It pretty much smashed everything in its way, just like as iron smashes everything, right? Just like the scriptures say. So we're going to go back to the Greek Empire real quick. Just a little history. Alexander the Great, although he is powerful and flamboyant and well-respected and feared, he was quite possibly the greatest commander of the ancient world, greatest military commander of all times. This guy, what he did, and if you look back at his map of the Greek Empire at its height, what he did was unprecedented. It was absolutely insane and has never happened in the history of the world. And he only reigns 13 years. Guys, look at the amount of land that he acquired in a 13-year period. That is just wild. That's incredible. And so he reigns from 336 BC to 323 BC. That's it. And so he continues going east. He ends up capturing parts of India, Afghanistan. He goes way out even to parts of present-day China. I mean, he's taken over land that nobody's ever even set foot on before, and tribes that they didn't even want to mess with way out there in the mountains. And so he does some amazing things. But what happens is at the height of his kingdom, at the height of the Greek kingdom, he dies. Suddenly, he abruptly dies at the greatest power, at the height of his power. And what takes place is his kingdom is eventually separated into four parts, and we're going to get to that in a second. But legend has it is that Alexander the Great was poisoned, and foul play was suspected. It says that he became sick. He come down with a fever, and then 11 days later, after he became sick, he dies. And this left the Greek Empire kind of in an uproar. They're like, whoa, what the heck just happened? And legend also has it is that on his deathbed, Alexander the Great gave certain parts of his kingdom to some of his generals and some of his commanders. He's like, you take this part, you take that section, you get down here in the south. And so that's what kind of happens. But what takes place as soon as he dies is there's a lot of backstabbing. There's a lot of jostling for position. There's a lot of battles. There's a lot of wars going on because some of these commanders were promised this, some weren't promised that, and some commanders and generals are like, I don't care what he promised you, I'm taking this land and you ain't going to do nothing about it, So there was a lot of wars going on, a lot of jostling for position, and this is what we call the Diadachi Wars. The Diadachi Wars were wars that took place after Alexander died, trying to figure out who was going to take parts of this kingdom. Okay, like I said, he died abruptly after 13 years. So it was just too much land to try to keep for one person, so we have these Diadachi wars. Okay, and so what takes place, I have a slide here, is the Greek Empire is eventually broken up into 4 sections. After a few years, 10 to 20 years of a bunch of fighting and wars between a lot of these commanders and officials, the kingdom is broken up into 4 sections. Okay, and this is very important, what you're going to see here, because we're going to go through this for the rest of Daniel. And actually, we're going to be talking about it in the Revelations. And I'm going to tell you why in a second. Okay, so let's go with the first one here. Egypt ends up being controlled by one of his generals, Ptolemy Soter. I'm probably not saying this right, but guys, just hang with me. Okay, so it's controlled by Ptolemy Soter, which would become the Ptolemaic Empire. Okay, and they controlled the southern part. I'm talking like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, that area down there. Okay, and then we have Persia. Okay, ends up being controlled by Seleucus Nicator. And this would become the Seleucid Empire. Okay, and what the section or region that I am talking about here is the part north of Israel. Okay, so we're talking about Turkey around the Black Sea, the ancient Assyrian Empire, over into Iraq and the northern part of Iran. That is the section that Seleucus Nicator takes over. And so we're going to kind of stop here for a second, guys, and talk a little bit. Okay, you see on here, in parentheses, I had the king of the south and the king of the north. Okay? And the king of the south and the king of the north. If you go over to Daniel chapter 11, which is a huge prophecy, we are going to read about the kings of the north and the kings of the south. This is a huge battle that takes place from the time that Greece falls all the way to the very last days, to the time of the end. Okay? And I want you to remember that. Okay? And so if you're reading Daniel chapter 11, it's confusing, but if you're reading Daniel chapter 11, it starts talking about these 2 kingdoms. That is the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire. Okay? And these kings rule from these sections of land. If you know anything about the Bible, everything is based around Israel. Okay, when the Bible says north, it means north of Jerusalem. When it says south, it means south of Israel. East, west, everything is centered around Israel. So when it says the king of the north, it's talking about that section just north of Israel. And when it talks about the kings of the south, it's talking about those regions just south of Israel. Okay, and so in Daniel chapter 11, we have these fights between the king of the north and the king of the south right after the fall of Greece. And it doesn't stop. It continues for a couple hundred years, and it follows these 2 kingdoms, and then we get to a guy called Antiochus Epiphanes. And you may not know too much about him, but this was a ruthless, disgusting king at this point in time, and he ends up taking a bunch of land in and around Jerusalem, and he ends up setting up an object, and it's comparable to the object of desolation or desolation of desecration that we read about in Revelations. Jesus talks about it, and Daniel talks about it. Okay, Antiochus Epiphanes ends up setting up a statue of Zeus in the Temple Mount area, in the temple. Okay, this is blasphemy at its highest degree. Okay, so Daniel chapter 11 starts talking about that. Okay, it gets all the history of the kings of the north and south and all their wars, and it gets to Antiochus Epiphanes, and then as soon as that happens, it starts comparing, and it jumps to the end times. It jumps to the end times, to the time of the Antichrist. Okay? What the Bible is doing there is comparing Antiochus Epiphanes to the Antichrist. And so this is huge and this is important. Chapter 11, Daniel never leaves that region. What I'm trying to tell you is that much like Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the king of the north at that time, the Antichrist is going to come from that same section, that same region. Okay, it will be from the ancient Assyrian Empire, Babylonian Empire, Iraq, Iran. It's going to come from that region where the Antichrist comes out of. Okay, and I just want to clear this up because I got a lot of people say, the Marcone guy, he could be the Antichrist, or Donald Trump could be the Antichrist, right? Or some other guy, or even the Pope, guys. The Pope or whoever it may be is going to be the Antichrist. Guys, the Antichrist is going to come out of that region and that section north of Israel. That's where he comes from. Okay? Bar none. It says it right in Daniel chapter 11. It never leaves the king of the north. That's where he's coming out of. Okay? And so we get a little confused about what's going on with this and what's going on with that. And so I just want to break that down right now. Guys, the false prophet and the Antichrist are two different things. Okay? And we're going to talk about this in a few. But the false prophet and, Lord help me. All right. The false prophet and John the Baptist are very similar in what their missions are. And what I mean by that is that John the Baptist, what did he do? He paved the way for Jesus Christ, right? He was doing miracles. He was preaching, repent, turn to the Lord. The Messiah is here. He was baptizing people. But when Jesus Christ came on the scene, he took a step back, right? He kind of gave away all of his authority and gave it to Jesus. The false prophet is going to do the exact same thing. Okay, he is going to be the leader at first. He is going to pave the way for the Antichrist. Okay, and when his time comes up, after the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, the false prophet hands over all of his power and authority over to the Antichrist. Okay, and guys, the false prophet is going to come out of the Vatican. There's no other way that it's going to come out of. And we're going to talk about the 10 toes of the statue. We're going to talk about the horns. You guys have heard about the 10 horns. Then you have the little horn coming up out of those 10 horns. The little horn represents the false prophet. The 10 horns, the 10 toes that represent Western Europe that we're talking about are talking about 10 kings that will form and unite out of Western Europe. Okay? This will be Western Roman Empire. If you know anything about the Roman Empire was broken up into two sections, Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire. You basically just go down the Aegean Sea, like I was talking, between Greece and Turkey, and that kind of split them up. Western Roman Empire, Eastern Roman Empire. So when it talks about these 10 kings that will rise up, and they will form and unite something, okay? And then you have the little horn coming up out of those 10 kings, which is the false prophet. These 10 kings and the false prophet eventually unite together. They make a lot of, I can't say it right, but they're uniting their kingdoms together. And what they do after the 3.5 years of the tribulation period is they hand over all their power and authority over to the Antichrist. If the Antichrist is coming up out of the north of Israel, out of that section, okay, we are talking about uniting the Western Roman Empire with the Eastern Roman Empire, okay? And that's what that means when we are talking about, in Revelations, about the head that is wounded, and then it's wounded, and then all of a sudden it appears and it's healed, okay? That is what that means. Those heads represent certain kingdoms, okay? And that is what the kingdom means. So, I know I'm spitting a lot of game at you guys right now. Maybe your heads are spinning, and I hope that's not. I don't want to get too far ahead. I don't want you guys to stop. I'm just trying to explain the things to you guys. Guys, this isn't what I think. This isn't an opinion. This isn't some theory. I'm telling you truth. This is going to happen. So, back to the kings of the north and the kings of the south. Because I forgot to do something, and I should have done this already. If we look at that region, you know what? If we can go over to the Roman Empire map here, the Roman Empire map. If we look at, and you can kind of see Judea here, okay? If we look at the north of Judah and south of Judah, what religion do all of them have in common? What is that religion? They're Muslims, right? They're Islamics, right? Pretty much everybody is Islamic except for Israel. Actually, half of Israel is too, with the Palestinians trying to take over the land, okay? And so, guys, the Antichrist is coming out of an Islamic and Muslim area, the king of the north. Okay? This means that the Antichrist will be a Muslim or come out of Islam. Okay? We have seen this time and time again, fighting about this land for thousands of years. Okay? And in Islam, they have two separate things. And this is why the kings of the north and the kings of the south are going to continue to fight all the way to the end times. Because if you know anything about Islam, if you know anything about the Muslim religion, there are two separate forms or two separate denominations. That is Sunni Muslim and, well, now look at that. I can't think of it. Shiite Muslim. Okay? Sunni and Shiite. And the difference between those is very similar to how our Christianity is. You have very conservative Muslims and you have very liberal Muslims. The Sunni Muslims, which is the kings of the south, that is Egypt and Saudi Arabia, are very liberal, okay? And you have the Shiite Muslims, which are very conservative. They are Quran thumpers, kind of like they go do exactly what the Quran tells them to do. They are following it to the T, okay? And so these guys, kind of like we have in Christianity, you kind of have the Catholic denomination and you have the Protestant denomination, and one's more considered liberal and the other's kind of considered more conservative, okay? And so they kind of have the same thing amongst their religion there, and Muslims, okay? And so these guys are going to eventually fight, and the main thing that they're always fighting about is who is going to be the caliph, or the caliphate, or however you say it, the caliph. Who is going to be the caliph of Islam? And what that is it's much like the Pope. It is the religious leader of Islam. Who is going to be the religious leader of Islam? Okay, and that's what these guys are going to be fighting about all the time. Who's going to be the king of all this land? Okay, and like I said, it's kind of like the Pope is, where the Pope is the religious leader of Christianity. Okay, I know not all of us feel the same way about the Pope and this and that and the other thing, but guys, the largest denomination in Christianity is Catholic. Okay, we got to get past the United States of America, guys. You get down into Central America, South America, pretty much all of Europe, and there's a lot of Coptic Christians in Egypt. Guys, they're all Catholic. Okay, Catholic is the biggest denomination. Okay, and so much like that, the Pope is considered the religious leader of Christians, even though we may not feel that way. But that is what they are going to be fighting for in the Islamic areas, in the Islamic territories. There is this fight between who is going to be the caliph, and eventually somebody is going to rise up as the true caliph. Okay, caliphate. I should have read and seen how I pronounce that when I was talking about. But that caliph will eventually be the Antichrist. Okay, he will rise to power in the end days. After the first 3.5 years, the false prophet and those 10 kings will give all their power over to the caliph of Muslims, or the caliph of the Islamic nations there. Okay, and that is where he's coming out of. All right, now I spent a lot of time on that, I'm sure. And so why don't we start getting going here and talking about some other stuff. I usually take a break at this point. Maybe we'll take a drink of water here. But we know the Roman Empire was the greatest of all empires, and they were actually smarter, and actually they're geniuses. They were smarter than any empires before them, okay? They didn't care about all those mountains and regions way out there in Afghanistan and in China and India. They didn't care about all that. They didn't care about all the desert way down south in Saudi Arabia and then way down past Egypt. They didn't care about all that stuff. All they cared about was the Mediterranean Sea. They wanted to control the seas, okay? And that's exactly what they set out to do. And this was masterfully genius, okay? To control the seas is to control everything, okay? And so we know Rome comes from out of Italy, right? And this is kind of like where they originally get their mafioso complex out of, okay? So they control the seas, and they're, all imports pay Rome. All exports pay Rome. Hey, you want to ferry across Alexandria to get some fine linen clothes? Pay Rome. You want to use the Mediterranean for your fishing industry? Pay Rome. You want to go over to Spain and get some fine wine and some fine oils? Pay Rome. Okay? Now you see where a lot of us Italians get this complex. Guys, it's been drilled into our head for thousands of years, okay? But anyways, these guys were genius, right? This was genius. And so the Roman Empire rules for over 1,000 years, okay? The western section of Rome ends up falling around 500 A.D., and the Eastern Empire, which is operated out of Constantinople, which is present-day Istanbul, Turkey, they last until the brink of the 13th century, which is around 1200 A.D., okay? So the Roman influence and customs were huge throughout this whole area, but it was around 476 A.D. when the fall of the Western Roman Empire falls, okay? 476 A.D. And so for the next 500 to 800 years after this time, we have what we call the Dark Ages, right? These are the Dark Ages. And obviously we've heard a lot about that. But from 500 AD to 1300 AD, like I said, it was the Dark Ages. And what happens after the Dark Ages, right around 1200 to 1300 AD, what happens? We have what we call the Renaissance era, right? This is the Renaissance. And I don't know if you guys know, but do you know what sparked the Renaissance? Guess it? Maybe not. The class kind of only got one person that guessed it. But what took place was the Crusades. The Crusades sparked the Renaissance. And if you know anything about the Crusades, what was taking place, and here's a big one, what was taking place was there was a war going on in Israel against, in Israel and particularly in Jerusalem because the Muslims, the Islamic nations had risen up and they were trying to take over the Temple Mount. They were trying to take over that land. Guys, they are still fighting over that land to this day. We're talking about 800 years ago. They're still fighting over this land, this Temple Mount area. Why are they fighting over this? Because the Antichrist wants that. The Antichrist wants to set up his shop in Jerusalem. He wants to set up that statue. Guys, there's a spiritual backing behind this, okay? And I'm trying to get you guys a link. They have been fighting over this for so long, and they're still fighting it to this day and age, and they're going to fight about it, of course, in the 7-year tribulation. It is going to be the Muslim nations that rise up against this, okay? That is where the Antichrist is coming out of, okay? So the Crusades end up going over there, and I don't want to think that you guys are not bashing the Catholic religion at all because, or I didn't say religion, Christianity. Guys, I grew up Catholic until I was 8 or 9 years old. You know, I'm half Italian, and they did amazing things. For 1,500 years, that was the only denomination there was just about, okay? I mean, they spread the gospel to the ends of the earth, though. I mean, they went all the way over to the Americas. You know, predominantly saying most of them are Catholics, right? So I'm not saying they did anything bad. But anyways, during the Renaissance and during the Crusades, Rome comes up with a plan, the Vatican, and they say, hey, guys, we have got to assemble an army of the Lord. Do you hear what's going on over there in Israel? And so they talk to, Italy gets a bunch of people, Spain, France, Great Britain, and they form what they called the army of the Lord. This is the Crusades. This is where the Knights Templars originally come out of, okay? And so they form this army, and they start going over to Jerusalem, and they start fighting back the Muslims back out of that territory. And they're wildly successful because the Lord's with them, and they push these guys back out of there, all the way back to like Iraq and Iran, okay? They forced them out of this land. Okay, it was hugely, wildly successful, and the Lord blessed them. We know that when a nation blesses the nation of Israel, they are blessed. And if they curse Israel, that nation shall be cursed, right? And so what the Lord does is this is when the Renaissance comes. He blesses this army of the Lord that it comes from Italy and Spain and France and Great Britain and those areas over there. And he blesses them immensely. So from 1500 to the 20th century, I mean, these are the biggest kingdoms. These are the world powers during that time, right? They end up finding the Americas, and so the Lord blesses them immensely. And guys, most of us are all descended from Western Europe. I mean, all of us come from there. And so we're still kind of a part of that, being blessed by what has taken place over the years, and still being predominantly, America is predominantly a Christian nation. I know it's questioning ourselves now, especially in 2020, but we're still being blessed from some of the stuff we've done 400 or 500 years ago, okay? So, all right, let's see, where am I at? Okay, verses 41 and 43. Verses 41 and 43. Okay, now we're on to the feet. The feet and toes you saw were a combination of iron and clay, iron and baked clay, showing that this kingdom will be divided, like iron mixed with clay. It will have some of the strength of iron, but while some parts of it will be as strong as iron, other parts will be as weak as clay. This mixture of iron and clay also shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron and clay does not mix. Guys, we are still in the period of time of iron and clay. The fall of Roman Empire happened, 1,500 years ago, 60, whatever it is. But we are still in that iron and clay time period where we can see over the last, 4 or 5 centuries that Rome, actually over a thousand years here, that Western Rome has been trying to piece itself together. Okay, and we have heard back in history, the King of England would give his daughter to marriage the King of Spain. But things never quite worked out. They can never get things united the way they wanted to. But they've been trying to do this forever, ever since the fall of Rome. But here, since the 20th century, the last 120 years or so, we have what we call what? The EU, right? The European Union. Okay, so now we have what? A one world, not a one world, you have the euro dollar, that's one currency for the whole area. They have a trade agreement between the Europeans, okay? So they're getting closer to where all these guys have the same stuff, okay? They're trying to create a one world government within Western Europe, and they're close to uniting. I mean, technically, I know we have some of them that had seceded from the EU, but guys, it is closer now to them uniting than it has ever been in history, okay? And that is Western Europe that we're talking about. And so when it talks about some of these nations are clay, and some of these nations are or kings, I should say, are like iron, we're talking about, places like, for instance, Italy, Germany, Austria, France. That would be considered the iron part of Europe, right? And then you have other places like Croatia, Bosnia, or Greece. Those would be considered the clay there of Western Europe, right? And so they're bonding together. They're not quite there, but that's what it means, okay? Some of these guys are very powerful, and some of these nations are very weak, okay? So this is what they've been trying to do, is unite ever since the fall of Rome. And here we are. They're almost there. They're almost there. And so that's what I've been talking about. These 10 toes, okay, represent the 10 kings that come out of Western Europe, okay? And they are eventually going to hand over all their power and authority over to Eastern Roman Empire, which is what we're talking about, the king of the north. We've already talked about that before. And when this happens, that wounded head will be healed, okay? The Roman Empire will be back again at its greatest height. And that's why they say people are awestruck. Their mouths are open, and they can't believe what they're seeing, because who would have thought that the ancient Roman Empire would eventually be restored to its completeness? Okay, and that's what's going to happen, okay? With the help of the false prophet, who gives all the power of Western Europe back over to Eastern Europe, where the Antichrist is, okay, where the Caliph is, okay? And that's what's going to happen, okay? All right, let me make sure where I'm at. Sure I didn't leave nothing out. Make sure I'm not going to repeat myself like 500 times. Like I say, yes, there are spiritual powers behind this. We know that. This is a spiritual fight that we're in. Okay, we know that this is from Satan and the Antichrist himself, and we are at war. All right, let's go to verse 44. Verse 44. During the reign, there it is right there. Forgot about that. During the reigns of those kings, what kings? The 10 kings we're talking about out of Europe. Okay, during the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed or conquered. It will crush all those kingdoms into nothing, and it will stand forever. During the reign of what kings? Those kings, the kings that will come up out of the Western Europe. It is during the reign of these 10 kings, along with the false prophet and the Antichrist. During the reign of all these guys, that is when the rock comes. That is when Jesus Christ comes to set up his kingdom. All right, verses 45 here. That is the meaning of the rock cut from the mountain, though not by human hands, that crushed to pieces the statue of iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold. The great God was showing the king what will happen in the future. The dream is true, and the meaning is certain. So that is what the rock represents, the kingdom of God. If you remember, Jesus calls Peter the rock from which I will build my kingdom upon, right? He is talking about Christianity. He is talking about the church coming in there, spreading like wildfire, and that's just what the rock turning into a mountain means. Jesus Christ comes back, gets the gospel in there. Once he comes back after the right at the end of the 7-year tribulation, of the 1,000-year reign, that rock is going to become a mountain, and his kingdom will never fall. Okay? All right, so, and then in the end here, Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that, this dream that we reveal is sure to take place, and it will happen in the future. Okay, so here we go, guys. We're almost done. We're in the last section. Nebuchadnezzar rewards Daniel. Verses 46 and 47. Then King Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel and worshipped him. And he commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burn sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, "Truly your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret." Okay, so the king is so impressed that he literally starts worshiping Daniel and bows down before him. I'm sure this was very awkward to Daniel. It's probably, "Hey, dude, get up. I'm not the Lord, man. I'm just working for him." Okay? But if you look, Nebuchadnezzar also acknowledges the God of Israel, that he reigns supreme. And he actually, if you look at it, he starts spouting out Scripture. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar said he is the God of gods and the King of kings. I mean, here, that's Nebuchadnezzar spouting out Scripture, right? So he's a believer right then and there, okay? Or at that point in time. We're going to get into more stuff later. But 48 and 49. Then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all his wise men. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court. So here we go. Daniel becomes chief of all the wise men. He becomes the prophet of prophets. And Nebuchadnezzar pretty much makes him second or third in command of all of Babylon. And Daniel, being a real good friend, he hooks up his homeboys, right? He hooks them up with some awesome jobs. And so him, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are in charge of all the affairs of Babylon together. And then it says Daniel stayed in the king's court. So this is amazing. The Lord sets up Daniel and his 3 friends. This is only the first year of their training, mind you. This is the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So here these guys are. They're in command, and they're ready to be appointed as rulers there, and before everybody else starts coming back from Judah and these deportations. Remember what we talked about last week. So that's all we got, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I know we went over a lot of stuff. I want to try to take it slow, guys, but we had to give you some good stuff here, a little foreshadowing of what we're going to talk about later. Like I said, Daniel chapter 11 is huge, and we're going to break all this stuff down really slow. We're going to really let it sink down into your soul and spirit, okay? I'm just kind of throwing a little things at you now to get you ready for what we're going to do later. Hey, guys, stay tuned. We got lesson 4 next week. Lesson 5 is going to be amazing. I got a lot of spiritual warfare. This will be our first lesson on spiritual warfare. So stay tuned to lesson 5. We got some awesome stuff that the Lord's ready to reveal. And hey, I hope you enjoyed it. God bless you guys. And like I say, Jesus is number 1 in the 931. Love you guys.